The Industrial Revolution is the catalyst for the 20th century. Now, although technically the Industrial Revolution begins in the end or in the middle, I guess you could say it's debatable, but let's say in the middle of the 18th century, 1750s, 60s, 1770s, uh, through the 1800s, 1820s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. In the United States, it becomes much more prevalent by the 1870s, 80s, 90s, and early 20th century. But regardless of when you start the Industrial Revolution in those earlier decades, whether it's the mid to late 1700s or early 1800s, the Industrial Revolution is what brings about the 20th century. And the Industrial Revolution, as most of you probably already know, is the transition from a largely agrarian society, one that was based around farming, agricultural agricultural. Um, I lost my train of thought. Agricultural commodities in small markets, and also small, usually family-owned and family-sized cottage industries, such as shoemaking, weaving, weaving cloth, weaving baskets, usually out of your own home. The Industrial Revolution brings about the creation of the factory system, and the factory system changes everything. It changes the way people worked. Instead of working at home, they would work in a factory. Instead of working on a farm, they worked in a factory. Instead of doing agricultural labor, they did industrial labor. Instead of working land that they owned, they worked in a place that was owned by somebody else, so on and so forth. And it also changed the way people viewed and looked at each other. Rather than being members of a community initially, especially, the Industrial Revolution transformed people really into machines of themselves. For example, in this picture, these people, in the eyes of some, especially factory owners, were machines working side by side with actual mechanical machines to achieve a certain goal. Everything was mechanized and structured around the machine. Also, as a side note and as a factoid, this is when the clock becomes significant in society, apart from the wealthy and the elite, because people had shifts: first, second, third shift, and you essentially lived and died by the clock, punching in, punching out, so on and so forth over the course of your lifetime. Take a moment and jot down in your notes some benefits of the Industrial Revolution as well as some negatives. Pause the video, take a moment, jot that down, and then turn the video back on. So you should have jotted down a couple of things. Whether or not you fully understand and grasp the Industrial Revolution is something that we hope to correct as we move forward. Note that without the Industrial Revolution, the way we live today really would not have come about. All of us are wearing clothing that was mass produced: shoes, socks, pants, sweaters, coats, etc. All that stuff was produced by machines. So, unless you're somebody who has all of their clothing hand tailored, uh, all of us are reaping the benefits of industrialism. Things are made quicker, and things are made cheaper. And they're cheaper because they're being mass produced at a higher rate. You can mass produce them with machines. You can streamline the production. Everything is made the same. You can make it more efficient. You can make the same product over and over again. And this creates bulk that you can send to markets where people originally didn't have access to these types of materials. Maybe they had to make their own clothes, or they had to make their own guns, or they had to make their own whatever utensils, and all of a sudden they could buy those things at a fairly reasonable price. And so industrialism, for one of its benefits, brings many, many modern items, clothing, fabric, so on and so forth, to people who would otherwise not be able to have it. However, one of the drawbacks to industrialism and the factory system, as you can see, and as I've alluded to before, is that workers began to become the machines themselves. And they were treated that way in many respects, to the point where they had to rise up in some aspects. You also had the environmental problems that come about from industrialism because most of these factories, the ones that didn't use water to power their mills, ran with coal. And so you had the creation of a pollution problem, really, for the first time. Acid rain, smog, horrible living conditions, and of course, a system that was really geared to maximizing profits in the least amount of time, maximum efficiency at the um, at the expense of everything else. So these are one of the drawbacks of industrialism.